we've been on Linux Mint for a little while. Well, you for how long? How long have you?
Well, all right. So let's be fair here. I used Cinnamon. That was the big thing, right?
Oh, that's right. I misspoke.
You did.
Just Cinnamon.
But that being said, I did test the beta when they were, first announced the upcoming release of Linux Mint. That was one of the ways I did test Cinnamon. I've really been rocking Ubuntu Cinnamon for some time now. I originally started to help out and do some testing, and I hang out into the support Telegram room there, and so I thought it'd be a good idea to have something that I could use to reference and whatnot.
So you've got a personal stake in Ubuntu Cinnamon then?
I guess so. Yeah, sure. No, I mean I'm in the Ubuntu verse. There's no doubt about that. And so I've just got an install as a VM, so it's nothing, too extravagant, if you will. But right. I do. One of the things I like about the Ubuntu Cinnamon version is it's nicely themed. It looks good. It's pretty cohesive. I don't have all the apps though, which is probably one of the biggest benefits to Linux Mint. Honestly, I think I know you've been using Linux Mint since quite some time.
Yeah, so off and on over the years, but I think full time since about 2017-ish.
Okay, that's some time.
So initially, I was on Linux Mint. It had to have been around one of the earlier versions because it was. I had this little Sony Vaio laptop. That is a little 10-incher. It was tiny. It was nice. I mean, it was one of the smallest ones I could get my hands on at the time. This is even before PCs came out, right? Yep. And I went through a lot of the stuff that we talked about in the history. The media codecs thing. Reason I originally tried Linux Mint was because I didn't want to have to figure out how to. It turns out it was just one command. I just needed to run one command in Ubuntu. But but Mint had not only the codecs thing, and even Clem laments that that's why Linux Mint got kind of popular right at the very beginning. But I think had it gone any other way, Mint may not have become the distro it is today. I think that initial, here it is, but it's easy, is really what sparked its popularity early on.
Right.
And it got me too, right? So I just didn't want to fiddle with it. But the other thing, especially about that laptop, is this is around 2006, 2007, right? So you got to remember, back then, widescreen monitors of any kind did not work out of the box.
Oh, yeah.
And even on Windows, they were fiddly.
Yep.
So you had to have the right thing, otherwise it would stretch it and it would get weird.
Yeah.
So in Linux, you had to actually go in and hand configure the Xorg conf to notice that you could actually paint the screen on more pixels, right?
Right.
Over the years, that got fixed, and there was auto detection.
Much better now.
It all kind of wrote itself. But early on, you didn't. You had to go in there and manually muck with it yourself, and Mint did that for me automatically as well. So I mean, these are two problems that when you installed the easy distro at the time, which was Ubuntu, you still had to go in and hand tinker a lot of things. And Mint just solved that for me. And once I was in, I was kind of hooked.
Right.
And while, if Linux were my home full time back then, it would have been Mint. But
that makes sense.
Linux, not a Mint thing, but just Linux in general was just not in a place that I could use at the time.
Yeah, well, the application availability was a problem for a lot of people. That's no doubt about that.
Pretty abysmal back then.
Until things like Flatpaks and stuff came along, that made it harder, right? Even though Ubuntu and Debian, their repositories are chock full of stuff, probably much more than a lot of other distributions, especially at that time. And that was some of the draw. But I mean, until some of the mainstream things really started to get more widely available. And I even mean like some proprietary things like Discord and stuff like that a lot of people somewhat rely on for whatever reason. Until those things became easily available, Linux was a hard place to land for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So it was off and on for probably the next 10 years or so, maybe 8 years or so. But once I came back, it was not very long. I mean, obviously, I did me a whole, just like I think most people do when they kind of try and figure out
you do
Linux,
a little hopping.
And they're a bit of a tinkerer. Yeah, you do a little hopping, right? You stay on this one for a little bit, swap to this one, swap to this one. But once I hit Mint again, I was like, oh, wait a minute. I remember this.
It's a good solid place to land. Yeah.
It was, and after I hit Mint, every time after that, it was pretty much this is not quite as good as Mint. So, okay, back to Mint.
I mean, so that's your reference. That's what you're building up, or, trying to compare to, for sure.
Right. And then I would see another new shiny and I would go check that out, but I would come back to Mint. Another new shiny and back to Mint. And this would happen over and over for a couple of years until about 2018 when it was just like, all right, fine. I'll do a little hopping on the side, but Mint is just the place for me. And I mean, I'm definitely a tinkerer. I'm definitely one to not be afraid to get into the configuration file and make it be the way I want it to be. But there was just something I think Mint had that nobody else had, which was just a bit of a just works kind of attitude, right? It was one of the very few distros at the time that added a bit of the kitchen sink. That wasn't everything, but
no, there's some value add stuff though, for sure.
Everything you expected to work worked, and it continued to work version after version after version. So it just made it inescapable for me.
Yeah, and I think the X apps and stuff, they make the complete ecosystem, and that's really the shining thing for it, honestly.
Yeah. So my how'd it go? Dan's, yours. Did you do it through the break?
Yeah. No, I did, so, and it's been good, and I like. I forget. Did they did an alpha release before the beta release, and I did that too, I think, as far as Linux Mint. So I've tested it, and I'll say this: we talked about this alpha release for anything that comes from Clem. Really is probably equivalent to a lot of other people's release candidate type stuff.
Yeah,
it's seriously, it's usually pretty solid. There's some things, and sometimes it's mentioned, and there's probably some other things that get picked up, but you don't see a lot of change, generally speaking, and it usually works really well.
Breaking change.
It's solid.
Rare for even a breaking change to make it to the beta. There have been, of course, no one's perfect, but man, the quality, I think, is just another thing that makes me keep coming back.
Yeah, and so they talk about, the pace at which they're developing, and I think the thing is when you deliver a pretty good solid product in like an alpha or, a beta or something like that, then it can help speed it up, or at least make it seem like it's really sped up, because there isn't a whole lot to do after that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Right. So your how'd it go lasted a couple of months as opposed to just one.
Yeah.
Like we normally do.
Right.
And mine lasted approximately 7 years.
Yeah. You got me beat on that.
If we go in contiguous chunks, right?
Well,
like 7 years.
I can't say that I haven't touched it in probably the same amount of time. Like I've certainly, it was probably one of the things I did hop to, and I don't know why it didn't stick, but it didn't stick. So, I mean, there you go. I probably just went back to the base of Ubuntu and lived there. You know what I mean?
And that was actually a lot of my hops would be, okay, is Ubuntu finally good enough for me to get away from Linux Mint? Because I did like Unity, man.
Right.
I liked Unity a lot. Even though, they went through the whole Amazon kerfuffle and everything else, and, the people that liked Unity never spoke up until Unity was about to die, or, that whole thing, right? Yeah. There are two groups, by the way, right? People that hated Unity, those were the vocal people when Unity was going on.
Right.
And the people that loved Unity, and they didn't speak up until it was too late. So
it's gone, well, I mean, it's not gone. It's back again, right? It's official flavor and whatnot, and that's fine.
Exactly.
But so same. I probably did some of that, and certainly had used it enough to know what it was all about. And I do like the format, if you will. Panel on the bottom, typically, your menu things. I think the menu stuff in Cinnamon is pretty nice. It's probably a little more than I like, if you will.
Yeah.
I usually use the minimal.
Yeah, I think I've outgrown that menu.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually one of the big reasons why I would hop, right? Like K-Runner existed.
Oh yeah,
has for a while, and that is it, man. That is the way to find stuff when you don't know exactly what you're looking for. I think the Cinnamon menu is still pretty clumsy. Just like the Mate menu, and just like
similar.
the Whisker menu from XFCE and the LXDE, right? I mean, these are basic menus. So if you know the name of the thing that you want and you type it in, it'll find it. But if you get fuzzy, if you need anything that's not directly called by name, then you're kind of out of luck. And so on Linux Mint specifically, but on Cinnamon, I have to go with something else. And I think Albert is...
Yeah, that's a launcher. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yep. And it does the fuzzy thing, right? It finds files, even if you misspell them. It will do. You can turn them on, like it'll do web searching and everything. Like it's a K runner
only
for a
universal.
GTK based desktop. Yeah, and it's just nice. So if I had one nitpick about Cinnamon, because I just can't think of any really good ones. If I had one good nitpick about Cinnamon, it would be that menu kind of sucks.
Well, maybe they just need a runner. Maybe that's the fix, right? So just build a runner, and that'd be cool if they built that. I mean, I think that would. I think you could do that and have it blend in and it'd be cohesive, like with all the other things, especially with all the other things they have going on. So
yeah, outside of like real third-party applications that I bring in with FlatHub or Flatpak, right? Like that's really the only thing I think. I could see that the desktop would, adding something to the desktop, that would be an improvement. That would be it. Everything else works as I expect it to. Like it's very obviously when you get dropped into it, a Windows 7, Windows 10 kind of paradigm.
Boring is good. I mean, in a way, right? You know what
consistency is good.
Because that's what you get. Yeah, you get consistency out of it, and you know what to expect. Your expectations are, met out of the box. So there's that. It's not crazy innovative, which is pretty good for a lot of people. They just want to get stuff done.
Right. And I think that's another reason why I really kind of with Cinnamon in general, but I mean especially with Linux Mint, that I got trapped because I could fully ignore the entire desktop and then just do what I need to do. Right? Like if that's waste 3 hours doom scrolling on the internet, I can do that and the interface doesn't get in my way. It should tell me, hey man, you've been doing this for an hour. You should probably stop. Is there an app for that?
There is.
Tell me what the Linux app for that is.
I don't know, but I know there is. There's got to be.
Okay. Like that's really just kind of it for me, man. Like it's invisible to me. And I think that's in my old age.
Yes, as you
these
turn
kids
into
on my lawn,
you turn into the graybeard. I gotcha.
This is what I want. I'm not a TUI or what? Not TUI. What is it? The window manager. I'm not a whim kind of person, but I do like it when the desktop environment is just invisible to me.
Yeah.
And Cinnamon does a fantastic job because everything can just hide. Everything can go away, and then all that's left is just you and the app that you're trying to use.
I mean, so they still got some work ahead of them, right? I mean, so there's some things that are coming down the pipeline that they're kind of planning for. So like Wayland, that's a thing. And so they've got some experimental stuff happening there, right? That's good.
Oh,
they're keeping up with it.
Let me just speak to it real quick. The Wayland session, absolutely horrible.
Yeah, well, they mentioned that though, right?
But they're not saying it's ready. As a matter of fact, you have to go out of your way to enable it.
Yeah, that's true.
So no one will accidentally be on a Wayland session because it's not ready, right? Like this is one of those things where it's testing. When it's ready,
They're working on it.
Right.
They're working on, the X apps, getting more of those, getting them to work right.
This is something. So Linux Mint has in some circles has got a rap for being very hostile to everybody.
Yeah.
And I think the snap thing really had a little bit to do with that, right? But we'll talk about the snap thing.
We will in a
minute.
Bit.
Yep. But this move that they're making with X apps and fully separating them out from Mint development to just X app development is the absolute antithesis of that thesis, right? Mint, the team, everybody, they're just hostile to anybody outside. This is going to be a boon to any desktop that runs off the GTK framework and needs applications, and they want them to look consistent.
Yep.
Basically, GNOME is all in on Advait.
Yep.
Anybody else that isn't in on Advait but also uses GTK, you're just kind of up a creek and your stuff's going to look weird. Unless this XApps thing really
got a
takes
good possibility.
off.
I mean, unless they're porting some of their applications to do some similar things, XApps will be the universal in a way. It'll be a universal thing that other desktops could probably add.
And Mint has this kind of collaboration, this kind of work, to almost 20 years of it under their belts. They know how to do this. Let the XApps thing happen.
Yeah.
And I think all of these other desktops can really focus on the development that they want to be developing on instead of having to develop yet another text editor. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, we need another one of those. Sure.
Right. But I do want to talk about the hostility, right?
Yeah.
Because the snaps thing, right?
Snaps
that
was
really brought it into focus. And that it didn't look good, but...
I've got a quote here. So July 2019. From Clem.
Okay.
Yeah,
awesome.
He wrote it on a blog. It says, "You might wonder why I'm so outspoken about this all of a sudden. There's a certain sense of urgency which demands action on our side. Ubuntu is planning to replace the Chromium repository package with an empty package which installs the Chromium snap."
Clem
had a call there, and use the urgent word and strong language. It's all strong language here. And basically said that this is not what we're about. We're not going to change things behind your back. We're going to give you, what you asked for, essentially.
That's right.
And so that's the premise behind the whole thing. And that's why they're so firm about it. I can't say that that's a bad thing, but I think it's a bit of a misrepresentation that things were happening behind your back. Necessarily. I mean, because you told it to install Chromium and it did that. Even though it was a snap. I mean, does anybody really know when they go into a software center or something like that what technology is behind that? No. They just want an application, right?
Counterpoint. I think there are a lot of people that use Linux Mint that are also technical users that
could be. Yep.
This idea of conservatism in your desktop, in your Linux, means that there's not another entire separate packaging system that comes in, and starts handling packages, right? I mean, if you want to get down to the tinkery thing, which is something Linux Mint allows you to do, you may or may not be happy about the fact that when you clicked on a button, it does the thing.
I'll rebut that a little bit with some of what Linux Mint does in the background is tinkery and does things without your knowledge. Their apt actually does different stuff.
Oh, that's right.
Than the normal apt, because it's a wrapper that's written in Python, and it calls other applications. It might call dpackage, it might call aptitude, it might call apt, or it might call apt-get. And so I will say there are enhancements probably to make it easier for the user, but it's doing some stuff that you probably don't know. And especially
a little other side of the coin there. I didn't think about that. That's true. Yeah.
And so it's not a bad thing. It's just, it's the same thing, but different.
Yeah. Well, okay. So on the apt thing, their apt was first.
Yeah, fair.
Linux Mint's apt was first, and then Debian decided
it's just going to drop off Git, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's totally cool, but it collided, and Clem was like, we already called it apt. It's going to stay apt. So
Right. But it does call some other things that you just don't know about, too.
Yeah, exactly. You would have to go into the Python script to actually figure out what the heck it's doing. Yeah. It is defined in some of the blog posts because...
Yeah, it's not terrible stuff. It's just...
Yeah, one of them specifically mentions, hey, here's this new thing called apt, and this is before apt was apt. And this is what it's going to do. Here are the commands that you can do apt install, and this is what it'll do. So it was all on the up and up, right? Like this didn't just show up one day.
No,
but
not quite as underhanded, I suppose. But it's doing different stuff, and now it's so far removed that people just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, you can type apt install whatever, and it just works, and so you just kind of assume it's doing what you think it's doing, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So okay. Point taken. I'll give you that one. But I do think though that the snaps thing. I think more than anything, it just didn't fit into the vision. Right?
No, probably not. No, I agree with that. Flatpaks are better fit, honestly.
Yeah, and this is especially coming at a time when I think the majority of folks that were using snaps or not using snaps identified snaps as just not as good.
Yeah, that's true at that point. Yep.
This is 2019. Remember, this is 6 years ago. Snaps are fine now, but I mean, 6 years ago they were.
A little rougher.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and certainly I think Flatpaks had a much better perception at the time. They didn't have as much software.
There's some ups and downs to both, right?
Yeah. I mean, Ubuntu was, Canonical was greasing some palms on the up and up to get software into the Snap store. So, I mean, certainly Snaps had more software, but Flatpaks just seemed a little more organic, and I think people... liked it a whole lot more, and I think that fed into a lot of this because with snaps it was a unilateral decision. With Flatpaks it was more organic-y, and so felt less pushy.
So Clem did not go into that decision uneducated, if you will. So like he did go to one of the developer summits and whatnot. Right. And so
he was going to be on the team.
He actually initially thought that, well, maybe we can make this work and to find ways to bring Snap into Linux Mint. He actually was on board with it from kind of at the beginning.
Right. Yeah. This wasn't an Ubuntu bad kind of thing.
Right. He changed his mind later on, which is totally fair, because like I said, he went and did some research and homework on his own.
And then almost a year later, before I guess it was Mint 20, Clem just added a blocker.
Yep.
It just would not install Chromium. And that kind of left people that used Chromium in a bit of a lurch. But Mint does what Mint does, and they just started packaging Chromium. Yeah. And then we're like, okay, all right, we hear you. We know you want Chromium. We know you want it on Mint. I'm not going to let Snap happen without a deletion of a file. That's all it took.
Right.
Or changing or a commenting out of a single line, right? Like that's all it really took. I think people really overblew what Mint was doing. Like, Mint is preventing you from just comment out a line in a file. But
well, and I think they've teased about the idea of being able to have a toggle or something in the Software Center or something at some point.
But Mint does what Mint does, and they just started packaging it.
Yep.
So, and there was a lot of chatter about, well, I bet Mint won't package it. I mean, that's a lot of work. What do you think they're going to do? Take on a lot of extra work? Well, the answer is yes.
Yeah, they did.
Every single time.
Yep.
They've done it in the past, and they do it now.
Yep.
And then what happened?
Well, they did the same with Firefox. Well, here's the thing. You almost don't need to do it with Firefox now because Firefox is doing it themselves.
I mean, the snap of Firefox is fine, but the snap thing just doesn't jive with Mint. So they're going to continue to leave the blocker in there. But whatever they block, they're going to end up packaging. And this is the second major project. They've done it with others. This is the second major project we've seen them just say, all right, fine.
We'll take
you want it? We'll give it to you.
Yep.
Yeah. This is just the way that they do things, right? And this leads me to my last point, right? Which is, name me another operating system besides Linux Mint that is just like the whole thing. Like the full experience. They do everything.
So like elementary probably comes the closest. I feel like. I mean, that is probably the next full-on cohesive. If it doesn't exist, we'll build it. Kind of distro. Right.
Exactly.
I think they're probably the closest. There's some others that make some attempts and do some things, but I don't think anybody has the whole thing. Like, they're not developing the desktop environment, all the applications, and, configuring the underlying base system the same way. Nobody.
I think that kind of ecosystem requires an attitude of, all right, fine, we'll do it ourselves. Like it requires that kind of attitude. Otherwise, you just, whatever change happens upstream, you just let it wash over you and your users, and it just is what it is. But that's something Linux Mint has not allowed to happen. Maybe for a little bit while things get figured out, but ultimately it's always you know what? This is our vision. This is how we're going to do it. And if we have to do it ourselves, we will.
Yep. And I think it totally leads to that consistent thing you can count on, that comfy blanket for Leo, so he can just snuggle up and always know what he's got.
Anyway, one last question. Was Yaru first or was Mint Y first? Because they look really similar.
I don't know the answer to that. Man. So if somebody
chicken or egg,
if somebody knows which was made first, the chicken or the egg, let us know. Anyway, you can catch all the links at linuxuserspace.show. And if you want to send us an email so we can talk about it in one of those feedback episodes, that's your topic things that's coming up, you can email us, contact@linuxuserspace.show.